and to ask that you prioritize legislation and policy in the field of gender-based violence. And I want to do so by giving you 4 really good reasons for why you must do this. The first reason is that violence against women, in particular, as a subset of gender-based violence, is a global crisis. It is something we must talk about. We must remove it from the bedrooms and private spaces, and we must acknowledge. In this beautiful world of ours, 1 in every 3 women suffer from intimate partner violence. In indigenous societies, where some of us come from and where some of our members of parliament come from, it is 1 in 2 women who suffer from intimate partner violence. Out of trafficking victims world over, 79% are women and are forced into trafficking through means of violence. There are 14.2 million child marriages. These figures are scary, but these figures are real, and it is a global crisis. And the pandemic of COVID has only served to make it worse. In fact, we say nowadays there is a silent pandemic. The violence that is now in the homes, people are working from homes, children were no longer in school, they were in homes. The silent pandemic, the figures are just rising up, and there are more. It is a global crisis. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow parliamentarians, violence against women and GBV is a human rights pandemic. As you heard from my sister here, the violence is always accompanied by a violation of some right. Either the right to equality, the right to life, the right to free movement, the right to own property, freedom from discrimination, freedom from torture, freedom from, and the right to dignity. So right now we have a plethora of violation of human rights, and we must do something about it. The third reason why members of parliament should make this a priority is that violence against women is a public health emergency. Let me repeat that. It is a public health emergency. Did you know that 58% of all women killed are murdered by a partner? That means that violence against women kills as many women as cancer does. And it kills more women than women who die from traffic accidents and malaria combined. The physical health, the mental health, emotional health of these women who suffer this violence is rife. Women suffer from depression, they become suicidal. 55% of the women who are suffering from violence in their homes are most likely to be HIV positive. And then there is long-term consequences. The women who are victims of acid attacks, child marriages where children are giving birth to children, FGM, sexual violence, these all have long-term mental and physical effects. And when women suffer, so do the children. So really, it is a public health emergency. But lastly, and I think this one, and I've learned in Parliament, is more persuasive than most, is that violence against women is an economic crisis. The costs of violence against women tax the healthcare system, the judicial system, and the welfare system heavily. According to a World Bank report, violence against women costs about 3.7% of GDP in most countries, and that's more than we pay or we allocate to education. Violence against women creates lost productivity, lost wages. In the US, for example, they have lost, through violence against women, 8 million days of paid work. The cost of violence, ladies and gentlemen, has been quantified by the World Bank as follows. and in comparison. So the cost of conflict and terrorism is quantified at about $167,190,000,000. The cost of violence against women is $4,423,000,000,000. That is the cost. What can we do therefore as members of parliament to make sure that we remove the cost of the effects and repairing of violence and enabling countries that effectively deal with the violence to put this money elsewhere, in education, in other things that need those resources? What can we do? There are gaps in the legal framework. Many countries, particularly in the South, in Africa, do not have legislation. In Kenya we have legislation, but what about the implementation? It's very frustrating to have a law on the books, a law that's not working. How do members of parliament, apart from creating those laws, ensure that they're being implemented well? How are you, as MPs, what is your watchdog role of the criminal justice system? How do we ensure that these cases, even when they come through the justice system into the courts, are not delayed, do not make the victims of those violence second victims because of a poor justice system? How can members of parliament follow up, oversight the executive in terms of policy? How can members of parliament, through their constituencies and because they're elected by the people, how can they raise community awareness in their constituencies so that we go move towards prevention of the violence rather than to address the violence when it has happened? How can the members of parliament persuade their political parties to make this an agenda in the political party manifestos and on the political party platforms as parties go to campaign for elections? How do we persuade them to do this? And finally, members of parliament, how can you allocate money for this problem? More money for awareness and prevention. More money for emergency health care where all these victims go to hospital. It's really within your power. I want to just leave you with those thoughts, and I thank you for allowing me to speak today.